times that we're going to be asking for a lot of feedback moving forward. So that's the thought process behind that. So for the agenda today, we just have a couple strategic planning updates. We did launch our website, and then we're going to be showing you the feedback process for the regional summary that we turned in back in December. And then we're going to be asking feedback on our agenda, that is our agenda for the April 25th meeting in North Lake Tahoe. So, like I said, the goal for today is feedback. So it's kind of your guys' opportunity to help us on like, what do we need to improve upon or change moving forward. So the first few of these slides are going to be duplicative, I think, for most of you, but we've gotten mixed feedback of finding that balance of talking at you guys, but then there's also a lot of feedback that's come back to us that a lot of people are still unclear of the process of where we are. So as we go through these slides, like I said, we did show them back in on March 1st, but if there's something that's unclear about it, please let us know, because this is all kind of the information that's setting the stage for that April meeting. So just kind of the regional progress of where we are right now. This is that familiar graphic that we went over that talks about the strategic plan framework. So it's kind of a bottom-up approach. So, you know, this is where at the bottom here, part 1, this is what we completed. This was all the research, findings, data that the state asked for. It was part of our contract that we, mandatory had to do this deliverable that we turned in back in December. And all of that information is foundational, and it's feeding up and it's informing the rest of this process. So the strategic plan is the process that we are currently in right now. That is also part of our contract. We are meant to produce this strategic plan before we can move on to projects. So it's coming from a contract piece, but then there's also, it is critical that our strategic plan aligns with the projects that we're eventually going to be funding. So this graphic just shows how many different community groups are involved right now. So the whole thing is called the collaborative. State doesn't want us to call it the HRTC anymore, so we're just calling it the council. We're shortening it. Then we have our subcommittees that support the council. So the local government subcommittee, project identification subcommittee, business workforce and education subcommittee. We are working on putting together some industry specific working groups that's in the works right now. We also have, SBC is not running it, but there are some county cohorts that are happening and providing feedback to our project navigators. And then we have our tribal roundtable, which has been really critical in this process. So this is just kind of another illustration on some of the things that are feeding into the strategic planning process. So we have, starting on the upper right, we have all these state guidelines and directives that we have to follow. That's feeding into it. We have this constant feedback loop between our team, SBC team, and the community. There's all these project ideas that have gone into that tracker tool. That is informing this process because it's data we're constantly reviewing. Then there's all of this foundational data, the community input from last year, the regional summary report that was published, and all of our the community, the council, subcommittees, all of that feedback. So these are all inputs that are currently being filtered into the strategic planning phase. And then this graphic, which I know there's a lot going on, but it's so great because it really gives an overview of the entire process. And that includes multiple funding buckets, because this is the part that gets a little confusing, even for our team. So we are currently in the strategic planning phase. So January to July, we're working on co-creating a plan with all of your feedback, all the community feedback. And as you can see the arrows, everything's feeding into that past inputs, the project idea tracker. And then you see the big star, it says due. This is we have to fulfill that piece of the contract to the state of California. But all of this informs the next phases. There's it's the implementation phase, but it's broken down into 2 funding buckets. So there's catalyst funding, and then there's implementation funding, and they are different. They have different SFPs, they'll have different application processes. The HRTC will be deciding on the projects that are funded by the catalyst, but the state is going to decide the implementation funding and how that's dispersed. So that's the main distinction between the 2. So this is just a quick overview of our deliverable. This is the actual physical document, the strategic plan that we are working on drafting and pulling together right now through all those different inputs that we went over. And this is what we're going to be asking feedback for in part of that April meeting. So we're going to be putting some kind of populated like strategies and goals of what, based on what we've heard that the region would like to focus on. But then we'll be asking all of you in April to kind of help articulate those a little bit more or help guide us in the right direction. And then this is just kind of reiterating. We don't have to go into this too much. So does anyone have clarifying questions about the strategic planning phase and like what we're currently in right now? Because if there's anything that is unclear, we can help, in our communication, like to the region on like what it is we're doing and what like the current dollars are being spent. That's helpful for us. And then also, is there anything that really resonates with you? So is there something that you're like, yes, that made sense. I like how you guys explained that. That's also really helpful. And because it's such a small group, I might just start calling on people.
Erica, I'll start.
Okay, great.
Hi, everyone. It's Barbara Hayes. So on that slide where you had all the arrows and this feeds into that and the timeline with the big star, if you could go back to that one. Can you go backwards?
This
or
one.
No? Yeah, that one. So am I correct in understanding that the catalyst funding and the implementation funding are both going to be available in the fall at the same time?
Yes, but the implementation will be spread out, so it won't all be available at once. They broke it into 3 phases.
And the 3 phases are over what period of time? And is it just time phasing or is it subject matter phasing?
Time phasing. So it's 100 million each year. So this first year, they'll release the first 100 million, and then next year, the next 100,
Okay.
and then the last year. Yeah.
And then the catalyst funding that you mentioned, decisions made by the collaborative, the Eastern Sierra Collaborative. Does it have to be approved by, or does the state in any way have any say in catalyst decision?
As far as we know, as long as it tracks with the criteria that we were given, right? Because if there's an audit process, then we have to show that. The decision is up to the HRTC.
Okay, and you guys have received the contract and have the money. The contract's been executed and locked down, and okay.
Not yet.
Okay,
And we don't anticipate that happening until maybe at the earliest this summer. But the one caveat with that is that we cannot bill catalyst and planning dollars at the same time. So there's no double dipping, if that makes sense.
cannot bill catalyst and planning money at the same time. Okay. So therefore, you're not approving any catalyst projects until after August, when you submit the plan.
Correct, because we cannot, until the funding buckets are spent, that in the
Mhm.
planning phase, they're not gonna let us move on to bill the next piece.
Okay, that's
Um,
interesting information. So the whole idea of catalyst being pre-development for potential implementation funding projects is not, it's sort of happening, but not, in the sense that 100 million will be released this year, subsequent with the catalyst funding, i.e. pre-development. Okay,
Yeah, I think if there's implementation dollars this year, if
Mhm.
we have projects that are like last mile, then that would be the implementation funds in the fall this year would be really good to apply for those projects. But for projects that are catalyst funding, we should probably wait a year or two, right? Because we want to use catalyst dollars and then think about implementation.
And is the same thing about the money spend, about the planning phase has to be complete before catalyst funding is released? Does catalyst funding have to be spent before we can apply for implementation dollars?
It won't be available till, they told us the SFP for implementation will most likely be released in September. So then it'll be a month application window. So then they probably won't announce it until, my guess is closer to December. So
And then-
planning phase will be over.
Okay, and then what is the role of the collaborative, the regional collaboratives, relative to submittal of implementation projects?
So I think the biggest role for the HRTC would be like using the strategic plan that would be published by them, is helping like filter through and prioritize, like as a region, if we come together and we're like, okay, we want our region to focus on these 3 applications. And kind of rally to support those 3 projects. And I'm just making this up. It could be
Yeah.
2 or 1.
Okay,
2 further points of clarification, Barbara.
yeah.
One is the criteria for the catalyst funding and implementation it was just released last week for
Mhm.
public review. It's actually not in public review. It's in, the conveners are having feedback sessions. It will be likely open for public review next month.
Mhm.
And then any comments will be incorporated. So we don't have the final criteria for catalyst or implementation. And the second point of clarification is that the state fully expects that no one project will be fully funded with implementation funding. Any
Right.
application must show a feasible and reasonable capital stack, where
Mhm.
implementation is just part of that.
Mhm. But we don't, so kind of going back to what you mentioned, Erica, coming out of the strategic planning process, are we going to have a list of projects within our strategic plan? Or are we going to have project themes?
They're not requiring us to include actual projects in the strategic plan. They took that piece out, which is actually good, right? Because it gives us a little bit more time to work on that. So kind of what we're foreseeing is like, what we would like to do in April is talk about themes, like what do we think would go well together, and then what should we prioritize? Because there's so many. I mean, the tracker tool that we've put out, I think we've got probably close to 100 now. And so what we would like is for everyone to like sit down in person and start like hashing out kind of workshopping, like, what do we think those first kind of priorities should be? And start doing that like this summer, so that way we're a little bit more prepared to have a more serious conversation this fall.
Mhm.
And
But we're
also
working on,
also in the context of the new criteria that has just been announced, because there are some changes to what we originally understood.
Yeah.
And can
Okay.
I add as well that the criteria being draft, they very pointedly don't include that implementation projects need HRTC approval. So there's this open question that the state has not really answered yet about whether or not someone could come in from the outside and ask for implementation funding.
Sure.
But it's heavily implied that the HRTC should be involved at all levels in these implementation funding requests.
Thank you, you guys.
Linda, I saw you came on camera. Did you have questions?
Oh, Linda, you're muted.
I just want to thank Barbara for, calling some, for some clarity on this. And Barbara, this is the work that you do. You're involved in this kind of thing day to day. I'm an elected supervisor and I come to this, for the meetings that are called and, the work that we've been doing. But at the end of the day, it seems like we're spending a lot of time continuing to try to explain the process once again, explain the changes once again, explain the name changes once again, and that beyond the product of our first report there, the I wonder what we're doing and where this is going. It seems painfully bifurcated into all sorts of different ways. You dissolve one committee and you put those people on something else. And maybe it's because this is what's being given to you by California Jobs First. It's hard for me to tell. So that's just my frustration. And now it seems like we're having another meeting to talk about the same things again, which have again slightly changed. And 25 minutes, almost a half hour's gone by, and I couldn't tell anybody what we've done in this meeting that was productive. So that's
No,
just
we
my
hear you,
sort of,
Linda.
low level, this is not my, like I said, Barbara is trying to struggle to explain this. And I would look at this as being Barbara's wheelhouse. And she knows this stuff. She knows how to make this stuff go. She knows how to explain it to others. And I'm frankly, I'm a little frustrated.
No, I think that's good feedback, Linda, and we appreciate that. Is there just, maybe I'll put it back on you and Barbara then, because I know there's been external communications about this. With what we have to do and fulfill to the state and like the timeline that we're given right now and what we're being asked, like, what would you like to see, I guess?
Well, I'd like to see, first of all, on your behalf, a clearer vision and clearer directives from the state. I don't know what the other regions are looking like. I don't know what they're doing, how they're struggling with the same imperatives that you're being given by the state on a regular basis. So I'm not going to jump, all over, your business council and say you guys are doing a terrible job, because that's not fair either. I would like to see some forward trajectory. I would like to see some clarity and something that doesn't change every 10 minutes. I'd like to see, sort of a timeline that wasn't this, which is just, some clarity.
Noted. Dana, I saw you came on camera. Did you have, or were you just saying hi?
No, I was just joining. Sorry, I had another call in between workshops, and so I was able to join. So I literally just joined.
Oh. Hi, welcome.
I joined to hear Linda's last comment,
Mhm.
but I wasn't sure of what had preceded it.
What preceded it was Erica's explanation of, among others, this slide, and then my further questioning about the timing and what's happening. But I think, hey, Dana, I'll just say to you, because we know each other and we're kind of in the same line of work. is that there's a growing level of frustration, as you just heard from Linda. And by the way, Linda and I did not rehearse that.
No, we did not.
So there's a growing level of frustration around the constantly changing landscape that has become SURF/Jobs First. And here, and I'll just say to you, Dana, what I'm going to say to Stuart and Derek, hopefully when I have a meeting with them in the next couple of weeks, is you're going to lose the good people that are going to implement this. If we don't hurry up and get to a point where there's clarity and, to use Linda's words, forward trajectory around project implementation. All of this meeting just to get updates constantly on changing names and changing iterations of the program is you're going to lose the leaders that you have at the table, who are the ones that you want and need to have quality projects proposed and implemented. And Dana, I honestly don't think it's SBC. I think it's the state just shifting all the time. You got everybody all ginned up about a program, and you're bringing people together and asking for input, and we're not getting to the actual meat of the project. You know, we need to get to projects.
So I appreciate that, Barbara. I think there's a piece that may be overlooked in what you guys have mentioned, in that one of the primary intents behind what was SURF and then became California Jobs First is a regional strategy. And the development of a regional strategy that is intended to provide that, if you will, roadmap to help identify the projects that everybody wants to jump on. And I, from the get-go, and I'll go back to, let's see, what year are we in? 4, 3, so fall of 22, as this was starting to kind of really, actually probably summer of 22, as things were starting to really pick up and announcements had been made, et cetera. I was constantly reminded and continued to be reminded that while everybody wanted to look at projects right now, we want to go fund a bunch of projects, there was still this desire and intent from the state's program that was launched that there would be these regional strategies, that there would be, I'm going to use this word, kind of rhyme and reason to what projects ended up coming forward. That's always been at the core of all of this. And so while I can appreciate a desire to jump right into projects, there's also this, and this has been consistent along the way also, that the regional strategy is a part of all of that. As I'm looking at the slide, that catalyst funding that was pulled out was to help regions get through some pre-development work in order to get projects that are ready to go in the queue for potential implementation. And so that's a kind of a parallel, if you will, realizing that there were going to be projects that weren't going to be ready, but that regions wanted to bring forward, but would not potentially be ready for implementation. So what could the state do to help the regions get some of these projects into a queue while at the same time aligning with the regional strategy that was underway? So we kind of have, you know, some parallel to it. And then I'll just add the last piece is the kind of the time frame that we continue to be under because of the statute. And it says the funding needed to go and be, you know, it's been provided and it has to be spent down by these dates. So that's been an underlying, how do I say it, direction, I guess, or underlying sideboard that everybody's been working within too, because of those dates that have been there from the beginning. So I appreciate that there is, you know, concern, but I also cover a variety of other regions, and I can tell you that they're all in varying degrees. A lot of them are really pretty far down a path of a regional strategy, using what their part one was and using that as the foundation for their regional strategy. There have been folks that are just now launching their, if you will, project portal. Others have got projects in the queue that they want to start to figure out which ones align with their regional strategy. So everybody's in a varying degree, and but you know, the state continues to try to provide some direction. The state, as you know, has been very sensitive to not telling the regions what to do, but trying to provide the flexibility for regions to do the work that they wanted to do, but still align with the basic intent of the program itself. So I'm not sure what else what you need to hear from us. I'm not sure what what directions are you needed. And I guess my question around clarity, and Linda, I know you can be frank, and Barbara, you too. When you say clarity, what does that mean to you, that you're seeking?
I'm sorry, Dana, you broke up a little bit. I'll try to answer what I think you said, but you're back. For me, clarity means that the ground is not constantly shifting, that a decision that the state made a month or two ago about some sort of when something falls and when funding is going to be due here and there doesn't change, that we have something, that whatever we're working forward with, we have our regional strategy, we have our, we turn that in, that's, that the state is not changing the goalposts, moving them every other time. Like, what is it we discussed last time around the around the criteria? Suddenly everyone's like, well, that's not what we thought the criteria was going to be, and now it's this. Well, okay, the state just changed that, correct?
No, let's be clear on that. The criteria, the state always said all along that criteria would be provided, and that has just been released.
True.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that, but I will add that the date that we did experience a change in was the actual deadline for submitting the strategy, and that was done in response to some really important feedback that we received from regions around June was not going to work. June was not going to be, achievable. So, all right, that was heard and dates were changed, and that's where the August 30th date came from.
Okay. So then maybe it comes back to Sierra Business Council and the process that we're using. So maybe it comes back to that. And I'd like if other people weighed in on this too, besides Barbara and I. I mean, there's a bunch of people here that I'd like to hear from too.
Craig, do you mind if I put you on the spot?
Me? Not at all. I have no such problems with the timing and the repetitive nature of all this. My questions probably will be repetitive. I'm hung up on getting my project submitted properly with the catalyst stage, which I think we've already done. However, we haven't written anything for an implementation stage. So do we need to write something up, or is this supposed to be post combination of, let me back up. I'm in the forest economy section, and there's several projects in there that could easily be combined. They look like same goals, et cetera. But that's the duty of the project identification committee, correct?
Yes and no, but let me clarify just a couple things. So, Catalyst, there is no official application for Catalyst projects right now. So the project tracker, the spreadsheet that we put out where everybody was putting in, they're just like their ideas. Like, let's just start collecting. As Dana said, most of the regions have created some sort of portal or document where we're compiling all the projects that people would like to see included just in the conversation. And so we're working on kind of using the criteria that we just received, like, what is today, the 20th? I think it's exactly a month since we've like received it. And we're working on creating a process for asking for applications, vetting those applications through the project ID subcommittee. Does that make sense? So right now we're just asking for people's like, what do you have? Let's use it to help shape the strategic plan. Because then we know what the region's priorities are. Right now it's data. But we will be releasing like an actual process for the Catalyst, probably sometime this summer. Right now it's all hands on deck to get this strategic plan. Otherwise, that's like our guide, that's our North Star in terms of like which projects we want to fund. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me, but with this implementation funding occurring at the same time as the Catalyst funding, I feel like I'm behind. Do I not need to get some duties finished here in terms of submitting? I mean, I don't even know if my project will be chosen at all, so I don't really see how I can go forward too far. But at what point are you going to want implementation funding grant requests? But however you terminize that.
So that'll be a separate process through the state. So the implementation funds, we don't even have the SFP for it yet, or RFP. We know, we've seen the guidelines, or at least the criteria, the
Draft.
overview.
Let's
Draft.
let's
Thank
remind
you.
ourselves,
Draft.
this is draft criteria,
Yeah.
and that the RFP for implementation funding is intended to be released in September. But the initial draft of the SFP will come out in probably end of April for public feedback on the implementation guideline that would be in an RFP to be released in September. So if I could just, Craig, just advise, implementation is not going parallel with Catalyst at this time. Implementation won't open until September at the earliest for any type of funding. Catalyst doesn't get accessed until the contract is executed with the region. They are a little ahead of schedule. We're hearing that there are some that are as early as late April into early May for the Catalyst to be accessible.
All right. I think
It-
that answers any questions I had. Sorry if I made you repeat yourself.
Just to clarify, Craig, no, your questions are great, but the criteria that was released last month has certain elements that we are still asking for clarification on and guidelines so that the state has a consistent look at things like an equity impact assessment, a displacement analysis. These are things that will be required in both the implementation and in Catalyst, but we don't yet know what the guidelines are for that. So you're in the right place. First of all, you attended the meeting. We appreciate that. We always appreciate community engagement. But you're fine. And we appreciate you being here. we know the outline of your project. Your sector is included as one of our priority sectors. That's very important. So you're not late to the party.
Well, it's all very encouraging. Thank you.
So could I ask for a point of clarification based on what you just said, Dana? Relative to timeline. So on this slide that's on the screen, our strategic plan is going to be submitted in August. I'm assuming that's the timeline for everybody, all the regions?
September 30th, excuse me, August 30th is the deadline for all regions to submit their regional strategies.
Okay. And
That-
then once,
I mean, what we
one-
refer to as planning phase part 2, which is the regional strategy. That deadline is August 30th for everybody.
okay, and did I understand you correctly that there are some regions that are almost ready to submit that strategic plan?
No, no, I didn't say that. I said that there are regions in varying degrees
Okay,
of their planning preparation. Some are much farther along than others.
because what I'm trying to get to is it does on this graphic look like catalyst funding and implementation funding occur simultaneously.
No, they will not. The implementation funding does not open until September, probably at the earliest.
Okay, and we can't apply for catalyst funds until our plan is done, which is August 30th.
No, I would kind of push back on that just a little bit, and I'm going to
Okay.
turn Kristen and Erica also can weigh in. Catalyst funding is going to be awarded through the region. That is not awarded by the state. You're not applying to the state for catalyst projects. That is awarded through the regions.
Understand that, thank you. But do we not have to have our strategic planning done before we can apply for and receive approval for catalyst projects, or the two are separate?
They can be separate. There's an alignment desire that what you're coming through with pre-development work in Catalyst would show an alignment with the regional strategy and some citation with it. So if we think about in the parallel work that's happening, that your regional strategy is underway and you've got projects that you're considering for Catalyst potential application through the region, then as the region creates its eventual additional criteria, if you will, or eligibility, it'll be the region that will be saying, yeah, we as a region, we prioritize this, and this is where we prioritized it, and this is why we prioritized it, and this is why we want to fund these Catalyst projects or fund these projects through Catalyst.
So Erica, Kristen,
you're
I'm
not-
not.
Catalyst is not dependent. You don't have to have your regional strategy in hand right now to begin thinking about your catalyst, but there will be an opportunity to show the alignment and the prioritization that has come out of the region with that alignment.
So to Mr. Case's point about catalyst should come first and then implementation kind of follow, so you can get that pre-development piece, either know that you got funding through Catalyst to do it and thereby, advance to an implementation application. It would seem to me, Erica, Kristen, and Eric, you're on there, but it just says Sierra Business Council, that maybe we need to move that Catalyst funding arrow back into June, July and shoot for criteria for Catalyst, so we can review and approve our regional Catalyst projects.
Can I just make the clarification? You have the ability to establish your criteria for evaluating Catalyst funding. That is I think an expectation that the state has, that you will have had that criteria. And at that local level, at your regional level, that you have established these are the projects that you as a region are prioritizing for these reasons, with your rationale and your rationale.
Yeah.
So just a couple things. a couple points on timeline. One is the criteria. So we can have our region's criteria, but there's this new state criteria that I understand we have to adhere to. And we have, right now it's under public review. It goes to public review next month, right? So right now
No, the RFP is going to go for public review. The criteria, let's understand that there's this initial criteria that is out there for consideration, and the RFP for implementation is what will be released in April, May for feedback. Yeah,
Correct.
public feedback.
But this, the project criteria says catalyst and implementation, things like alignment with CARB scoping plan, the displacement analysis, that type of thing.
Mhm.
We have to have all of that criteria for catalyst.
Well, let's be on, I mean, this came up in our breakout during the session today. So for instance, there's going to be pre-development work that's going to require some CEQA on a particular project. And there's going to be a CEQA that's not going to have a displacement assessment, and it's not going to have a community-based agreement in place or any things like that. There will be projects that will not necessarily have because of the project that it is, particularly in the pre-development phase, that criteria is not necessarily going to be specifically applicable to it because of the type of project that it is. A CEQA project, a work on a CEQA NEPA project doesn't have a CBA attached to it. So there is going to be there will be projects in pre-development phase that are not necessarily required per se to follow this implementation criteria. And we're kind of trying to thread a needle here, but the intent is to get your pre-development work going so that you can come back and get and apply for implementation when it becomes available. That criteria for pre-development may not apply, or excuse me, the criteria for implementation may not directly apply to some pre-development projects. It just may not. You're going to have to because Catalyst is being awarded at that local level, the state, we are not, if you will, evaluating Catalyst projects. We're not making those decisions. So here's what I would consider the catch to it all. If there is desire on behalf of the region to propose a project for Catalyst and potentially eventual implementation, that you want to be in the queue for implementation, you want to apply, bring that project forward for implementation, then you will be considering implementation criteria as you know it to be, and as it starts to, come out, you'll see it come out. So you will want to be considering that it has alignment opportunities with that criteria if you're looking at implementation funding down the road. So you're going to know what the criteria is as you start to look at your pre-development projects that you may want to get ready for the implementation queue. Are you following me on that? Are you?
I am. That was not my understanding. My understanding was that we were not to work towards Catalyst until we were done with the strategic planning phase. But that was, I'm sorry where I got that information, and that the Catalyst pre-planning had to be in line with implementation. So that's my misunderstanding, and I misunderstood that.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're making the decision. You're awarding the Catalyst funding. The state is not evaluating and awarding it.
I understand, but when they gave us the criteria, it says catalyst and implementation. So that, anyway, we don't
again,
need to, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's because if you're looking to bring a catalyst funded project through implementation, then there's these alignments that you're going to have. You may not, here's perhaps the other way to say it. There may be catalyst funded projects that you don't bring through the implementation queue.
Mhm.
Because, and that's one of the other big moments to all of this, is that could be projects funded in Catalyst that don't go through implementation, but rather are teed up for potential IIJA or IRA funding or other sources of funding that are out there. So let's not lock ourselves into Catalyst funded projects can only be in the implementation queue.
Okay, I think we just added to our April agenda then.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing, well, I have a question, and Courtney, I see you. I'm sorry to hold up everything, but just to follow up on this thread, so catalyst funding can be anytime now.
After the contract is signed,
After the contract
after
is
the
signed.
contracts are executed and that funding becomes available.
But we, as a region, could be developing the criteria by which we evaluate catalyst projects right now, pre-contract signing, so that when the contract is signed, we're ready to evaluate, do a formal call for projects and evaluate projects accordingly.
Yeah, and knowing what you know about implementation criteria, if you're going to be bringing that through implementation, then you would want to seek that alignment. Using those guidelines to help inform your catalyst guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then last thing on that, so our project ID subcommittee is working on that. They were just waiting to receive that draft criteria before moving forward.
Well, now we know
let's go
there's
to
no draft criteria.
I mean, again, I would encourage you to look at that draft criteria, because again, that's the cue, or that's the opportunity for implementation.
Got it.
So maybe another way to look at it is, we know that in that criteria, a lot of that has been put in that draft criteria came from a lot of the federal criteria that's out there. It's not anything that the state just made up, but it's actually pulled from it. So you might consider it if you are if you can think about integrating that criteria into your local criteria. That probably puts you ahead or in really good alignment with potential federal funding sources out there also, because of what their requirements are for projects that are coming out of IIJA and IRA.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is, don't ignore the criteria that has been put out there in front of you, but consider it as a good guideline for getting yourselves aligned with both potential federal funding and state funding for future implementation.
We better go to Courtney, because she's holding her hand up for a long, long time.
Thank you. Hi, Courtney Brown with the California Alliance for Community Composting. We obviously represent community interest in this process. We are planning to engage with all of the regions. We currently work with a state agency. We are funded by the California Department of Resources and Recycling, CalRecycle. We run a $3.5 million community grant program across all 7 regions right now. And we are struggling with where we would fit into this process, especially as this discussion is focused on the difference between catalyst and implementation, since we have been working with the state agency already since 2020. So by next year, we'll be at year 5. So this is really the point to put us into long-term financial sustainability. So right now, as I understand it, there are a few ways to get involved in this process as a applicant and also for community stakeholder feedback. And my understanding is I don't think that we got to it in today's presentation, but there's going to be this event in North Tahoe. We can come to that and register and be there and participate in all of that co-creation. There's also, I have had a chance to read the regional summary, and I'll just discuss that in a second, but there's also the comment form that we can fill out on each one of those sections of regional summary part 1 that was submitted in December, or what's being considered now through August 30th is your next part 2. And then for just the general feedback about engagement with community based organizations, just from my perspective, like, so the language that would be used for selection criteria, or however the HRTC, GoBiz, or Sierra Business Council is going to review potential projects, is that obviously we need to be on this priority project area list, but we only work in disadvantaged low-income communities as defined by Cal Enviro Screen and by CARB. We do all of the CARB scoping plans for investing in those communities, but the difficulty with reviewing an application also based on equity, diversion, and inclusion is something I would really like to contribute to this process. So that it's not just, as it's in several conclusion paragraphs in your regional summary, that it's a checkbox to work with community groups, because we actually are doing really innovative things for this circular economy, creating jobs, and also hitting your points on sustainable agriculture, climate resiliency. I mean, our name sells itself, but the point here is how to engage and select projects, even if they are submitting documentation that doesn't put them at a competitive or comparative or economic advantage to another more advantaged applicant that would come in here. So we have pretty well vetted selection criteria that we've had expert advisory groups review. We would love to share that with you as a way to really look at inclusion in people who might apply as catalysts, or for the implementation phase, wherever. I don't know how you're going to decide on where they fall in that, but so half a question and half a comment is, right now is my best way to participate by filling out the comment on the regional summary part 1 and showing up to the North Tahoe event. And when would we see if I have a lot of comments, which we do, to the regional summary, when would we see those changes before publication or before submission, to make sure that at least our input is not just a checkbox? So that review process and the changing process. Thank you.
Those are great comments and questions, Courtney. So I'm just gonna skip ahead here just because we are running short on time and we still want your feedback on a few things. So in terms of the regional summary that we did submit, there will be a process. So right now on our website, you saw that provide comments piece. Our timeline right now to do that is for fall. And then we're hoping every year it will be updated based on, updated data sets that come in. So I would just ask that when you do put in your feedback, and if there's something, maybe you have a data set that counters it, please include the source with it. So if you have, or if there's something that, oh, we want to see this, please cite an additional source that you're pulling from. So that way, everything that we have incorporated is all the state resources that we were told to use. So, yeah, that would be great though.
Courtney, are you, it looks like your organization's in the Bay Area. Do you have affiliates in the Eastern Sierra region that can be part of our collaborative.
Yes, we do. We're actually registered business in the Bay Area, but we work all across the state. We are working with 7 community groups on the ground in the Central Sierras through April 2025 with this CalRecycle grant. Tribal nations, schools, community gardens, and grocery stores. And so we're really trying to build out community-based hubs right now, provide sustainable jobs to run those hubs, and obviously create compost.
Her coworker Timothy has been participating in at least
Yeah.
2 rounds of our meetings. So
Great.
And he was not able to make it today, which is why I'm here. And I also do appreciate your time, but I also do have to run and host another meeting myself right now. So thank you for letting me get my question in. And we do really want to stay actively engaged in this. We think we are a triple threat. We hit all of the boxes. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Okay. So we do just want to ask everyone's feedback in terms of what you're hoping the outcomes will be, and I think we heard some of them already. But for that April in-person strategic plan meeting, this is how we have laid out our agenda just as a draft right now. So the meeting objectives would be co-creation of Sierra strategic priorities, community involvement in defining those priorities for future investments, and then, nurturing collaboration in the region, by being in person, having that opportunity for the face-to-face. Hopefully, inspiration, clarity moving forward, and fun. And then obviously we want to get specific feedback on key strategic plan components. So some of the data findings, the problem statements, focus area of work, goals, strategies, project ideas, storytelling, and community engagement. So it will be, and this was a survey that went out. Most people said that they would actually like to come to Lake Tahoe. So we're going to do it at North Lake Tahoe Event Center in Kings Beach. And it'll be an all-day 9 to 5 event. So there will be lunch provided, snacks, so forth. And we're expecting a pretty big group because it's all the entire collaborative or council, and then our subcommittees, and then additional partners in the region and stakeholders that would like to be a part of this. On the second day is our normally scheduled HRTC meeting, but what we would like to do, because we're going to have so many people in the area, is switch it up a little bit, and in the morning do like an open house where we get kind of like additional feedback. So the day before, we're going to have a lot of kind of raw feedback. We're going to clean it up that night, put it on like poster boards, and then set it up and have people kind of come in. You can get coffee, we'll give you stickies, and you can like walk around. And the idea would be is to put the sticky on like what you think is like the most important thing that came out of the day before. And everybody would have the opportunity to do that. And then there'll be a break, and we'll have our closed council meeting for that group, shorter version afterwards. So the idea with that, the longer day, the 9 to 5 on Thursday, this is the agenda that we have. So we're thinking there'll be some sort of data walk to open it up, because there's been a lot of questions on the regional summary data. And then a world cafe where we'll have tables set up, people will be mixed up, and there can kind of be some discussions around that. And then there'll be lunch. And then we'll go into that co-creation piece where we'll revisit kind of like what those like core values and guiding principles and outcomes that we want to see. And then like how we want to move towards the vision and addressing the gaps. So then there'll be some exercises where it'll be hands-on, where we work with strategies, and then kind of like a project ideation sorting, talking about themes within the strategic plan framework. And then there'll be a close. So are there any initial gut reactions just based on this first day's agenda? Does it seem like there's a lot of opportunity for individuals to participate and engage? Does it seem like there's not enough? Is there something specifically you would like to see that's not on here, or is there something that you like?
I like the summary of the our region. I think at the beginning,
Okay.
what we know today, the findings, problem statements, I think that's good. I hope we're briefly revisiting vision, core values, guiding principles, and outcomes. I think we've done a bit of that before. And this goes, so the whole first part goes all the way to lunch.
Right now, this is just a draft, so we can make adjustments.
Okay.
I would suggest condensing this down into a tighter day and adding the morning coffee walk around, do stickies as part of day one. And reserve HRTC board meeting on day 2. If I were designing it, that's how I would do it.
Great.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Craig, do you have any thoughts?
I just keep landing back on that lunch. No, not really. I look at this more as an opportunity to meet everybody in person, and that always seems to really grease the skids when it comes to having problems with knowing procedure or knowing somebody that you can call and talk to and so forth. So you could throw almost any of these activities up there, and I'd be fine with them as long as I can sit at those tables and meet those folks.
After hearing the feedback, thank you everybody for your feedback. It's always valuable. I have 2 comments. One is I do think we can condense the morning a bit so that we have more time for project ideation and sorting within the strategic framework. And I just want to definitely, especially to Linda, our goal is to come out of this with, we have the framework for the strategic plan built, but to come out with our actual strategies and at least draft goals and strategies and potentially tactics, and then start working on the projects that support those. So this is definitely a working session, and I think we can condense some of the review part and get more to the action. That would be my preference. But
Agreed.
I'm just sharing that with my team right now based on your feedback. So thanks everybody. We really appreciate it.
And then noting Barbara's piece about kind of adding this to the day before, and day 2 will just be the council meeting. So we will our team will work on that and send it back out. Yeah, these are just some of the objectives that we're hoping to achieve that day. But I think we touched on some of this, which is, just to reopen it again, like, what are you hoping to get out of like a 1 to 2 day strategic planning session in April? I think, Kristen just summarized everyone's thoughts on that. But is there any specific information you feel should be included in the strategic planning session? And if there's nothing else to add, that's okay.
I have so much to say. I mean, this whole process mimics the comprehensive economic development strategy. And I think, Dana, you're nodding. I think that's where you guys kind of took the framework. So if we're mimicking the SEDS process, then there should be an overview of a brief high-level overview of the data component, which you've got. But I don't think, I think that needs to be high level, given by somebody who understands the story they want to tell with the data or needs to be told with the data. And then we move into getting feedback from everybody that's gathered. These are busy people with other jobs who are gathering to provide input. I think we maximize that piece of the day. And I would just double down on what Kristen said is I would hope that by the end of the day, we're coming out with a framework of what the key goals are and potential strategies associated with the go forward. It doesn't have to be pretty. I think it can be stickies on a map, but just some kind of indication that the group at the end of Thursday can look at it and say, okay, it looks like this is how it's shaping up.
Great. It's all great feedback. Anybody else? Additional thoughts?
I just, yeah, this feels a little simplistic, but maybe a unifying strategy would be to show something that tells us what this whole process will do in the end of it. Where, you know, maybe even have like a little video or a little cartoon or something that says, you know, we wanted to do something and this is the evidence we had that we wanted to do something and this is how we went about doing it. And we did planning and then we did strategy and then we did, you know, all this stuff. And maybe we ended up with this, because I think what's missing for me, and like I said, maybe I'm just simple, is that a vision of where it starts and where it could ideally affect change. However, the greater brains can think of to do that. But that's just a thought I have, is that sometimes I have a hard time seeing the whole vision because we're so caught up in these little charts and these little, the words and what the words mean rather than what the impact could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I just, the comment about the SEDS, because SBC does produce the SEDS for an entirely different region. And we just finished our second draft. It's a very helpful document. The way I see this is different is this connects to a greater and new overall vision with the state of California, where the SEDS is driven by the feds and was definitely used as a guidance for how California Jobs First came together. California, in my understanding, leadership, all of the various departments have a greater vision that is tied to overall prosperity to the state, that is tied to their primary goals, which is climate responsibility and lifting all boats, essentially the equity portion. And that our plan, our region's plan that we're putting together will ultimately feed into the state's larger plan that they will put together, and then will help drive funding for many generations to come. And that's my understanding of it. So, and Linda, we can articulate that better, perhaps even have somebody from the state. Steve Frisch is really good at articulating this, but I wasn't planning on talking about that today, but we can do that.
Great. Any other thoughts? Or I'm also more than happy to give you 15 minutes back of your day.
Thank you, you guys.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We will
Thanks, everyone.
incorporate feedback and we will send out a new draft.
Bye.
Bye. You can end it.